Hello everybody, welcome to Square Balloon Actions and Tutorials. In this tutorial we're going to be working on our black and whites, and I'm going to take this original image here and I'm going to show you how to get rid of all this background information with the dodge and burn, well, with the dodge tool mainly, and also to check your image just to make sure that it prints correctly. So the first thing I'm going to do is, let me just close this one here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open the raw image, and you can see the raw defaults here. It was already a little bit, there I have my clipping warnings on, so you can already see where it's underexposed here, which is fine because that's what we want. We want to make all of these areas a solid black anyway. So we can start doing that. Let's just raise the contrast, which will give a little bit more depth to our image as well, and we will also, let's see, we'll bring down the blacks. Now if I start bringing down the blacks, we're going to lose detail in the back of the baby's head, so let's just go ahead and do that, and we'll get our make an adjustment brush. And what we want to do with the adjustment brush is we want to just start darkening a little bit more before we bring it into Photoshop. We start darkening the blanket just a bit, and up here as well. So because I have my clipping warnings on, it's showing me where all the areas that are going to be completely black, and so it's a good start before we bring it into Photoshop. We'll also make a new adjustment brush. This time we're going to raise the exposure. We'll double click on the shadows to bring them back up to their defaults. And what I want to do is, with this higher exposure, just want to bring it back in some of the detail on the back of the baby's head, maybe not quite that much, and then maybe on the dad's arm here as well. Okay, so that's a good start in Photoshop, in Adobe Camera Raw. So now we'll open it up in Photoshop, and so we can see that our image is already darkened up, but we want to darken it more. Now, you can start painting over with a black paintbrush, but I wouldn't advise that. The easier way to do it is to use the burn tool. The burn tool is over here. There's the dodge tool and the burn tool, and the burn tool is going to make things darker. So we're going to set up in the top toolbar here, we're going to set our range to shadows, and our exposure, let's say we'll start off at about 10%, and we're just going to start painting here, and that's going to blacken it out. So we can use a big brush for the bigger areas to start off with, and if you just take your pen off and then paint again, then it's going to make it darker. So it just goes on in layers. When we're getting nearer to the skin, we can just make the brush a little bit smaller, and then obviously under here we want to get rid of all of this right up until the dad's hands here. And the reason why it's easier with the burn tool, because it's set to a range of shadows, it's trying to just make the shadows darker. So it makes it easier to paint up near lighter areas, because it won't affect them the same way as a black paintbrush would. So there's just another little bit that we need to get under here, and we can change our range to mid-tones. It's going to make it easier to get those lighter bits under there. So what we want from this image is we want to make sure that all the areas that aren't the arms and the skin here are completely black. Let me just darken this here, set it back to shadows, a little bit higher exposure, because we want that to fade off. Okay, and this a bit too. Okay, I'm not worried about the way the burning is making that a very saturated red there, because this is going to be a black and white image anyway. So so now I'm just going to go in and deal with the skin. So as we go close up, we can see a few skin flakes. So I'm going to use the spot healing brush tool and make it nice and small, and just everywhere where I see just little dots, This is a great brush for that. Okay. And if this was going to be a color image, I would use my action for red skin removal and just paint over the areas that are kind of red in the fingers here. You can also use reduce red shadows, which is a one-click way of getting rid of some of the red. Just make that a little bit lower opacity. The next thing I'm going to do is some skin smoothing, and I'm going to just put it on at 100%. And if you want less smooth skin, because it's all about personal taste and just the style in which you edit, but you can always lower the opacity of that skin smoothing layer afterwards as well. And always with skin smoothing, I always like to do a little bit of sharpening as well. So I'm going to use iDefine for sharpening, and it's called iDefine, but you can really sharpen up any areas. I like to sharpen up little baby's fingernails and things like that, maybe even a little bit on the eyebrows. So sometimes when you take a picture of a baby in natural light, they pucker up their forehead. So I'm going to flatten that down, and I'm going to use the patch tool just to take some of that, the puckering out. And the way to use the patch tool is just to go around the area that you want to affect and just bring it up into an area of flatter or smoother skin. So now that we've done that, we can start making a black and white conversion. And I have some black and white conversion actions, but I'm just going to use a gradient map for this conversion because it's a nice quick way to do a conversion. So I'm going to click on my adjustments icon down here, and I'm going to go to gradient map. So as you can see, if this comes up as different colors, it's because your foreground and background colors here were different. But what you want is on your very darkest side, which is the left, you want to have black, and then the very lightest, you just click on it and you make it white by doing that. So what I want in this instance is, I don't want, although I like this how it looks here, I actually want this black background to be just slightly, not completely black, just slightly grey. Just bring it up ever so slightly, and you can see the way that's sort of muted it down a bit. So I quite like that one. So we'll OK that. Let's have a look at that image. Okay. Now it all looks very black, and depending on your monitor, the way your monitor is set, it may look perfectly black, but you need to check just to make absolutely sure that it is. So the way I'm going to check is I'm going to use a levels layer, just make an adjustment layer, levels, and I'm going to bring the midtones all the way up, and when I do that I can see little bits that aren't completely black. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back onto my background layer and use my burn tool just to go back over them to make sure that all of that is just completely black. Even up there, and a dot there under his finger. So once that's done, you can just delete that levels layer. So now that we know that that's going to print properly, I'm just going to recrop because I prefer a not so centered crop. So we'll just hold down Shift and just bring that in to about there. Have another look. I think I'm just going to burn another little bit here to fade this arm off before it reaches the edge. We bring that down another little bit. So there we have a nice black and white image. Now, if you want, you can still go back in and create a little bit more drama in with your contrast by using the burn tool. It's still set on shadows here, so let's just bring a little bit more darkness to the shadows on the face, which gives a little bit more molding. It's too much on the back of the head there. Just a little bit. Maybe even the midtones, and bring down a little bit of the exposure on the midtones too. And that's the great thing about the dodge and the burn tools, that you can just use them to mold your light a little bit better, bring a little bit more shading to the darker areas. And if you felt that you wanted your highlights picked up a little bit, you can just go on the dodge tool. The dodge tool will make things lighter, and this time I'm going to set my range to highlights. Again, a low opacity, and maybe we could bring a little bit more light to some areas like this. Just crisp it up a little bit. So there we have a nice sharp contrast black and white image that we know will print nicely, and there's the before image there. So it doesn't take too long. Just make sure that you use your dodge and burn tools instead of using your paintbrush, because you'll get a much and it's a much easier way to do it, and you'll get a much nicer result.